A brisk, golden dawn unfurled over Atlanta as the city stirred with the steady rhythm of footsteps and whispered greetings. Amid this urban symphony, a modest diner's flickering neon sign beckoned like a lighthouse, promising steaming brews and hearty fare to ward off the lingering chill of early autumn. Yet beneath that gentle allure, destiny was busy scripting an unexpected drama. In stepped Elijah Brooks, a retired warrior whose 2 decades in the Marine Corps had etched quiet valor and lingering sorrow into every line of his face. Fresh off a red-eye from Denver, his worn duffel slung over one shoulder resembled a traveling reliquary, containing a spare outfit, a cherished photograph swathed in soft cloth, and a dog-eared book whose pages hummed with memories. His measured gait left delicate marks on the tiled floor as he sought nothing more than a warm refuge, a brief pause from a world that had long overlooked him. But fate had already set its stage for turmoil. Behind the counter, Molly Evans, a determined college sophomore laboring double shifts to fund her dreams, was meticulously tidying up the remnants of a recent, chaotic encounter. Her steady hands and anxious glances echoed the repeated admonitions of her mentor, Dan, who warned that in a city brimming with surprises, caution was the only safeguard. When her eyes caught sight of Elijah settling near a rain-speckled window, a sudden shiver of apprehension, remnants of grim news headlines, stirred within her. The duffel resting by his side seemed to pulse with concealed secrets. What might it hold? Her tentative good morning spilled forth, a blend of cheer and uncertainty that presaged the unraveling of a fateful chain of events. Elijah returned her greeting with a courteous smile, calmly explaining that he was simply there for breakfast. Yet as Molly's gaze flitted to the enigmatic bag, she ventured a hushed inquiry about its contents, a question veiled in both politeness and latent dread. With a slight crease of his brow, Elijah replied that it contained nothing beyond his personal effects, mere echoes of his journey. Still, the charged air grew denser when Molly, her cheeks warming with uncertainty, murmured about recent disturbances and the need for vigilance. The subtle twist of her apron spoke volumes, as if warning that the calm was about to shatter. Before the uncertainty could settle, Dan, the diner's gruff yet watchful overseer, approached, his heavy footsteps punctuating the swelling tension. "What's happening here?" he demanded, his tone a curious mix of authority and concern. When Molly stammered an explanation, pointing toward the bag at Elijah's feet, Dan's eyes flickered between the veteran and the mysterious parcel. After a measured pause, he suggested that a quick inspection might allay the rising apprehension. In response, Elijah's calm voice cut through the murmur as he asked pointedly, "My bag or me?" Words that dangled like a gauntlet in the still air, leaving Molly momentarily breathless with dread. The charged silence shattered when the jingle of the door announced the arrival of 2 uniformed figures. A tall officer with a trimmed buzz cut and a keen-eyed partner stepped inside, their presence drawing a hush over the diner. "What seems to be the issue?" one inquired, his voice precise and detached. Elijah's reply, though measured and even, betrayed a quiet frustration. He was only there for his morning meal, yet his bag had ignited an unforeseen disturbance. With a reluctant nod, the officers requested to inspect the bag, a demand that pricked at Elijah's dignity. "I do mind," he stated evenly, as though fate had cornered him into a choice he'd never wished to make. Slowly, deliberately, Elijah unzipped his duffel and laid bare its contents, a crisply folded uniform, a modest toiletry kit, and atop these, a carefully wrapped photograph. With quiet reverence, he unwrapped the image to reveal a younger version of himself, standing tall among his platoon during his final deployment. In that breathless instant, the photograph exuded a noble defiance, its silent power arresting every eye. Molly's face drained of color as she realized the magnitude of her error, the moment crystallizing into a painful reckoning. Officer Morales, her tone softening into respectful inquiry, asked if he had indeed served, a question imbued more with honor than suspicion. Elijah's measured nod confirmed 23 years of steadfast duty, his voice heavy as he declared, "This bag holds my past, my service, my life." His words hung in the charged air like an unyielding challenge, daring anyone to question the legacy woven within those folded linens. No longer was he merely a man with a bag, he was a veteran whose quiet pride demanded recognition, forcing even Molly to confront the human truth behind her fearful assumptions. In a bid to diffuse the mounting storm, Dan offered a tentative apology. "Mr. Brooks, I'm sorry if this misunderstanding has caused you distress. We must stay vigilant in these unpredictable times." But Elijah's eyes, steely and unyielding, cut through the conciliatory tone. "Not personal," he replied, his voice low and measured. "You judged me, a black man with my memories clutched in a bag, without a second look. The diner plunged into an uneasy hush as every patron absorbed the weight of his words. An elderly gentleman in the corner nodded in quiet solidarity, his gaze affirming that this was not about safety alone, it was about bias writ large. Molly, trembling as she clutched the hem of her apron, managed a shaky confession. I never meant for this to spiral out of control. I thought I was protecting everyone. Elijah's response, gentle yet unyielding, resonated with raw truth. Intentions fade when actions wound. If caution is your creed, then let it embrace everyone, not only those who mirror your expectations. His words rippled through the space, transforming the air into a mirror reflecting the consequences of hasty judgment, leaving the room heavy with unspoken remorse. Sensing that the turbulence was beginning to ebb, the officers exchanged uneasy glances before deciding that their intervention was no longer required. In a final bid to restore calm, Dan offered Elijah a complimentary meal as a token of apology. But Elijah's reply was as cold as it was final. If peace was your intent, then do not sow discord with your assumptions. Reflect on your actions before presuming the worst. With that, he gathered his duffel and stepped toward the door, the soft chime of its bell marking his departure and leaving behind a silence that throbbed with unspoken truths. Outside, the city seemed to hold its breath as Elijah strode into the light, his measured steps echoing the internal battles that had raged that morning. Though he had weathered many storms before, this encounter left a fresh scar, a stark reminder of the arduous work required to dismantle prejudice. The photograph, now secured like a cherished talisman, served as both armor and memoir. In the solitude of his modest apartment, the anger from the day slowly transformed into a determined resolve. Seated at his kitchen table, he began to chronicle every detail, the confrontation, the harsh assumptions, the quiet fury of being misjudged, each word a call for dignity in a world too eager to judge by appearances. When his account found its way online, it struck a chord, initially with a few sympathetic remarks, then with a cascade of shared indignation and solidarity. Local media soon amplified his narrative, casting a spotlight on an incident that resonated far beyond the diner's walls. Meanwhile, social media erupted in outrage against the establishment, with calls for boycotts echoing in every post. Dan, overwhelmed by a flood of angry messages, and Molly, burdened with the weight of regret, found themselves at the epicenter of a controversy that no one had foreseen. The echoes of that turbulent morning rippled through the community, igniting conversations about bias and the true cost of assumptions. 3 days later, the diner issued a formal apology, a carefully worded pledge promising sensitivity training and better oversight. Yet for many, including those who had lived the ordeal, the apology rang hollow, a mere salve on a deep wound. Realizing that empty words would not suffice, the management reached out to Elijah, inviting him to a meeting aimed at forging genuine change. Though wary of performative gestures, Elijah saw in this invitation a chance to transform pain into progress, and he agreed to meet the following Saturday, a meeting that hinted at a future reimagined. On that fateful day, as Elijah stepped back into the familiar confines of the diner, the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon greeted him, but the atmosphere was unmistakably altered. Dan, now subdued and contrite, met him at the door with a sincere apology, while Molly lingered behind the counter, her hands trembling with regret. "Thank you for giving us this chance," Dan began quietly, his voice laden with remorse. With tear-filled eyes, Molly added, "I acted out of fear, and I've carried that regret every moment since." Elijah listened, his gaze steady as he replied, "Words can ease the moment, but true change is measured by the actions that follow." Dan assured him that measures had been set in motion, diversity training was underway, and a charity breakfast for veterans was planned, dedicated to honoring those who had sacrificed so much. Yet when Elijah pressed about long-term commitment, Dan vowed to involve the community and overhaul their policies so that this would not be a fleeting remedy. The charity breakfast blossomed into a heartening celebration as veterans from across the city filled the diner, their shared stories intermingling with laughter and a renewed sense of camaraderie. Staff, led by a resolute Molly, labored with earnest determination to rebuild trust and mend the frayed tapestry of community ties. Watching the event unfold, Elijah felt a quiet satisfaction, a recognition that even the deepest wounds could foster growth. In a tender moment of vulnerability, Molly approached him, voice barely a whisper, to express gratitude for his forgiveness. "I don't deserve your pardon," he replied softly, "but remember, forgiveness is not the end, it's the promise of doing better." The event not only raised thousands for veteran causes but sparked a broader dialogue that challenged ingrained biases and inspired change. As the afternoon waned and Elijah stepped out into the soft glow of the setting sun, long shadows stretched across the pavement like silent witnesses to the day's events. What began as a painful confrontation had evolved into a beacon for transformation, a promise that every soul deserves to be seen for its true worth, not judged by surface assumptions. The road ahead remained steep, yet for the first time in many long years, Elijah felt a fragile hope, a hope that the lessons of that turbulent morning might someday reshape a world too quick to judge, replacing bias with dignity and understanding.